Welcome to Whiskey Lore, The Interviews. I'm your host, Drew Hanisch, the Amazon bestselling author of Whiskey Lore's Travel Guide to Experiencing Kentucky Bourbon and the all-new bestseller Whiskey Lore's Travel Guide to Experiencing Irish Whiskey. And during this year of 2022, I've been trying to focus as much as I can on some regions and countries that don't get as much attention as Kentucky and Scotland do. And so we've gone to places like Ireland, Australia, states like Indiana, Tennessee, Missouri. But we've also headed to a country like France that's really starting to write its own history now. And in that spirit, today I have a guest who is coming to us from a country that has no real whiskey history legacy as far as I know, but they are carving a path right now and doing it with a distiller whose own history goes back to Scotland and Ireland. The country is Romania. The whiskey is named for the country's impressive Carpathian Mountains, and the distiller is Allan Anderson. Allan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Drew. Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great chatting with you, and I think really to kind of kick this thing off, we'll of course get into talking about the whiskeys that you're making right now, but kind of give people an idea who aren't great at geography as to where you're at.
Well, the company's headquarters is in Bucharest, in Romania. And for people who don't know where Romania is, it's in Eastern Europe, sort of sandwiched between Ukraine, Greece, Bulgaria, Turkey. It's near the Black Sea, the Mediterranean Sea. It's quite central for, lots of places to get to visit, nice places. So, the distillery itself is about 50 miles north of Bucharest. It's an industrial area right on the uplands of the Carpathian Mountains called Ploiești.
And so that's a very, very mountainous region. If we talk about are they more like the Alps? Or is that kind of the scale of them, or are they smaller than the Alps?
They are smaller. They're dramatic because the peaks are very pointed and craggy, so they rise quite steeply. But again, there's lots of nice valleys and roads up through the valleys, so it's a very dramatic drive up through the Carpathian Mountains. And that's actually how we arrived at getting the brand name. We were looking at sites for a distillery in a town called Slainte, which is in the Carpathians. And, I just thought Carpathian just sounds like a great name for a whiskey brand.
Yeah.
And it's stuck. So that's how we have it. That's how we have it. And everybody seems to like it. So
yeah. It looks good on a tin. And I noticed with your tins that you have wood on top, which is kind of an interesting piece to add onto a tin. Was there a reason behind that? Is that something localized?
No, I think it was to give it a more premium kind of feel and look. And also when the whiskey's finished and you throw away the bottle, you throw away the tube, you have a coaster on your desk to remind you to buy the next bottle of Carpathian. So there's method in the madness.
Absolutely. So, and the thing is that, I mean, my heritage goes back to the Czech Republic. So, and I finally got a chance a couple of years ago to go to the Czech Republic, and I was just absolutely floored by the architecture there and how different it is in Eastern European countries, that we've seen Western Europe for most of our lives, and so we're used to the architecture that we see there. But it kind of feels like you're going to another world when you head there, don't you? Doesn't it?
Well, certainly in Romania, there's very different contrasts of architecture. You have the remnants of the communist era in Bucharest, and then you can go to towns like Brașov, Timișoara, and further north, Iași, and it becomes a kind of medieval feel. So very, very kind of central courtyards with large sweeping towers and roofs and things like that. Very beautiful, very, very beautiful. So it's a country that's very undiscovered, and it's well worth a visit for people who don't know it and they want to see something, quite different.
How tough is it getting around as an English speaker?
Easy, actually. It's one of the easiest countries to visit as an English speaker, and it's especially as a Scottish speaker.
Really?
I have to really talk quite slow, but generally 95% of the population speak good English.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's easy. It's very easy.
It was really interesting because I was planning a trip in March to Spain, and we're going up in the areas where it's kind of a blend of French and Spanish. And as I was doing the research, that's when I discovered that actually Romania's language is based off of Latin languages, although
Yes.
a little bit, little different. It has a little Eastern European influence in there too.
Yeah, most Romanians can pick up the Italian language. They get the understanding of it. Maybe they don't speak it, but certainly they'll understand what Italians are talking about, and vice versa.
Yeah. And I think the thing that first drew me to interest in going to Romania is the connection with a character we know by the name of Dracula and Transylvania. You're actually not far from Transylvania where you're at.
It's probably about 4 or 5 hours drive, I think. Bran Castle, and I've been there actually, and it is quite scary.
Is it?
Until you realise that, I don't want to spoil it for a lot of people who believe in Dracula, but does it? It's Bram Stoker wrote the novel, the story. But there's a much worse kind of character that was roaming about in Transylvania was Vlad the Impaler. So he would put his enemies on spikes rather than suck their blood.
He was kind of the he was the inspiration in a way for Dracula, so I understand.
I think that was the case. But it's a very scary castle, and it does have that feel about it, that kind of scary feel.
Yeah,
it's not a place you want to go on a very dark night and wander about there.
I still have it as a spot on my list to go see. So yeah, is tourism? I know with Ukraine going on right now, that probably isn't helping much in terms of people wanting to go out into that particular area. But have you noticed any kind of a slowdown there? And is it
actually
the area?
No. So after the pandemic, there was a little lull in travelling, but everybody's going crazy travelling again. And certainly when I go to the airport in Bucharest, it's just bulging at the seams. Mm. And even at this, normally in a month of November, you see a kind of, slowdown of travellers, but no, I don't see it. People have just got a total thirst to get back out there again and go anywhere, I think.
I was going to say, one of the trips I would love to take is a trip on the old Orient Express, which I think went through Bucharest, as I understand.
It possibly did. It would have been maybe on one of the routes. But, Bucharest is called Little Paris. It's like the architecture is very, very similar to Paris's architecture on a much smaller scale. And there's the Arc de Triomphe, exactly the same kind of shape and size and things like that. It's there in Bucharest. So.
Yeah. So we were talking before we got on and started recording that you are, we can tell by the accent that you're not from Romania.
No.
So you come from Glasgow. So how does someone from Glasgow find their way to a Romanian distillery?
It's usually Ryanair or...
What's that?
It's Ryanair. It's a joke. It's a budget airline.
Nice.
No, it's a long story. But, well, I'll start at the beginning. I started my career exactly 30 years ago in Loch Lomond Distillery near Glasgow. And I was there for nearly 19 years. And I started as a technician and worked my way up to be the distillery manager. I had a short spell in White Mackay Invergordon Grain Distillery up in the north of Scotland. And I kind of realised that I need to live in a city. A big city, the countryside is just, it's nice in the summer for a weekend visit, but that's it.
Yeah.
Across the island, I was a consultant with the Slainte distillery project before it became Brown Forman.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was there just over 2 years, 2.5 years or something. Put the design packages together, did the presentations to Brown Forman board, and obviously they bought it, so it's their distillery, it's up and running and producing good whiskey. And just about the time Brown Forman took over, John Teeling was looking for somebody to finish his project at the Great Northern Brewery, which is now the Great Northern Distillery. So I was there for nearly 3 years, and from 2015 to 2017, I would have made all the first whiskies that came out of the Great Northern, along with the team that we put together and trained, and most of the guys are still there. So it's a very, very successful project. But you asked how did I end up in Bucharest? So it was a mutual contact between Dr. Nawaf Salami, who's the owner of Alexandrian, and an ex-colleague, an ex-employee of John Teeling. And he linked us together. They were looking for a consultant distiller. And I went across to Bucharest and I met Dr. Salami, and I could see the passion that he really wanted to make single malt whiskey, and it's still there. You could see the excitement in his eyes, like, I want to do this project, and that makes when you're doing a new project, if you have the buy-in of the owner of the company, it makes it a much easier task and more exciting task to carry out. So that's how we met.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So, and you worked along with two of my favorite people in the whiskey industry, John Teeling, and I guess you probably bumped into Richard Patterson from time to time with White Mackay.
I actually never. He would be based in Glasgow, where I was 4 hours away up in the Highlands of Scotland, and he never really came there, and I never really went to the head office that much, so we never really got to meet. But John Teeling, I met every week. I received these constantly, and I still keep in touch with John.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, he's a great guy to. When I reached out to him, I was like, blammo! He sent me back a message right away. I'm like, wow, he is on the ball. I wish I was that on the ball with getting messages back.
I think he's always got his iPhone in his hand, and he uses emails like texts.
Nice.
It's one line. You get one line, very straight to the point.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you were working for Loch Lomond then, and you're kind of building up all of this experience there, I mean, were there any people that really had kind of an effect on, because it seems like you are now kind of the guy who's helping to pave the way for other people, but was there anybody that kind of stood out to you as somebody who really helped get you going in the right direction?
I mean, I think everybody you come into contact leaves some sort of kind of impression, or some experience that you take away. But there was a lot. There was, I mean, the guy who started the Loch Lomond was John Peterson, who was an industrial chemist. So the two of us worked quite close together to make Loch Lomond, what it was when it was sold. We were, part of the project of the the infamous malt distillery columns that were banned by the Scotch Whisky Association. We commissioned them and altered them and did lots of projects there at Loch Lomond. But there's Brian Whitby, who was ex-North British Distillery. He was a consultant in the early days of Loch Lomond. There's some old characters like Fielding Liner. I don't know if you've ever heard that name before. It's another character from the whisky age. Moving on to White Mackay, John Miller, who's a technical manager, another great whisky guy. Across the island, David Hines, who is a chemical engineer, did Cooley. I also worked with a lot of they've actually retired and moved on now. Steve Hughes of Jack Daniels. So worked with a lot of great names and took away a lot of experience. And there's a lot of younger people probably coming up as well that I worked along with, who maybe in another 10 years might become big names. So
Very nice. Yeah. Well, it's always interesting to hear what, how people who are able to go out and do these things on, because I imagine out where you're at, you travel a lot, but that in some ways, it's not like you can go right next door and talk to somebody and say, hey, how do I do such and such? Or, because you're in an industry that is just getting started. So you got to feel maybe slightly isolated from that standpoint.
Well, I think, when you're a manager or a director, you are quite isolated anyway, because you have to make the decisions. But in Romania, when I went there was actually nobody who made whiskey. So, it was something, it was a blank canvas effectively, and started from nothing to making it, what it is at the moment.
Yeah.
But, there is, like today I was at the malting plant who supplies our malted barley, trying to convince them that we want to make peated malted barley at their malting plant. So they've never done it before. How do you do it?
Yeah.
So, this is a huge malting plant, Soufflé. It's called, a big French company. So we're going to look at taking maybe 400 tons a year of peated malted barley, one batch a year.
Very interesting. Will you use peat that's local, or will you?
There is. Well, actually, we source. We have a peated whiskey at the moment. We started it in 2019, and it's ready. But I'm going to keep it another year, I think, and we'll release it. And it's very, very nice. We did some master classes at the Bucharest Whiskey Fest show, and I put that as number 6, and it was a secret whiskey. And everybody in the master class just thought it was beautiful. It's really, really nice, sweet and smoky. So
yeah,
and it's still very young. So we currently get the peated malted barley from Belgium, and it's Scottish peat that's used to smoke it.
I was going to say probably not a lot of bogs around in Romania.
Actually, there is a lot of peat in Romania, I believe, near the Danube Delta. So that is the reason for trying to get the maltster here to peat it, so that we can say it's 100% peated malted whiskey. So.
Yeah, Romania is a really large country, actually. One of the larger ones in Eastern Europe.
It is. It's quite. It is. It's, and there's not that many big cities, but it's when you travel across it. It is vast, it really is, and it has everything. It has, it has seaports, it has rivers, mountains, plains. It's a very, very beautiful country.
Does it feel like a country that's kind of split in half by those mountains? Because I have a feeling it's not very easy getting around them.
When it snows, it's quite difficult, but for some reason, the country really has, they can clear a road. Whereas other countries, when it snows 3-4 inches, everything grinds to a halt. But here it doesn't actually.
Yeah.
You see about 30 snowplows turn up on the side of the road and things like that, and they just materialise, keep the roads open. It's nice. Fine that way.
So, but just because this is Romania's first whiskey, there is a interest in harder spirits there. I mean, that's I know there's a big wine industry, and in fact, that's part of what your company, family company, has been involved in the past. But talk about Romanian moonshine. Tuica, is that what it's? Is that how you pronounce it?
Probably Tuica.
Tuica. Okay.
So here, most people are allowed legally to make a small amount of alcohol at home. You can walk into the DIY store, and for €300-400 you can buy 2 pots, condensers, deaths, everything.
Wow!
To make Suica.
Nice.
And, there's lots of fruits growing in trees, and people pick the fruits and they ferment them, and they distill them up, and the diet is quite heavy, so there's lots of meats, and the suica is used to break up and help as a digestive sort of kind of drink.
Okay, it is medicinal.
Well, it's 60%. It's very medicinal.
Woo, yes.
It's hot.
Wow. And is it made from plum? Is that what I understand?
I think plums and apricots, any kind of fruit that will ferment, the local people will ferment it and distill it.
Yeah.
I have tried it. It's quite nice. It's sweet. It's not that different from a new make. Malt.
Okay. I was thinking it sounded sort of like a plum brandy in a way.
It could be like that. Anything it's like a wine distillate. It's quite sweet, quite light, easy to drink, high in alcohol content. And they drink it in shots. They drink it in small shots, so it's.
And there's no aging of it, so it's not like you're in the future going to be doing finishing barrels of it to.
I think some people put it in barrels and they maybe keep it there for 6 months or something. It comes out a wee bit coloured, but it can be flavoured with different things.
Yeah.
People put in essence, coffee essence and vanilla essence in it. They can change and alter the character of it. I don't actually make it myself.
Yeah. You think you guys will ever sneak into trying to make that a little bit of that on the side?
Yeah, I know. We do wine distillates and things like that. Probably it's a possibility. We do different fruit distillates that gets added to some of the liqueurs that we do.
So how are you finding the Romanian market for the single malt? Has it been something that is kind of accepted? Are there a lot of what would be the predominant whiskey that you probably would have on the shelf in a local store?
Well, when I first came, it was there wasn't a huge choice of whiskies in most of the stores. You would have saw Glenfiddich, which is quite big here. Jameson, Valentine's, the kind of normal, the big brands would have been that. But what I have noticed is that there is more and more whiskey brands popping up. Lots of cheap blends for cocktails and things like that. So we just released the whiskey to the market in November, and we've been gradually doing rollouts in Europe and different events and things like that. But some of the events we did here, what I did find is that I always kind of knew this, but Romania is traditionally a wine or a cognac drinking country. Mm-hmm. So we tried to bridge that gap with some of the finishes that we did. Cognac finish and a lot of Romanian wine cask finishes. To try and entice people to say, this is a Fitesca Negra finish. Let's give it a try. It's just that they can remember the wine name. The sales are... they're not in every major store yet. So initially, for the first couple of weeks in November, it was online only through our own site, and I believe it's going okay. And we had high hopes for next year. Actually, the owner was asking, "How many cases will we have next year?" And I'm like, "Let me calculate it." So
that means there's interest for sure.
I know there is interest.
So talk about the distillery and how it came together.
So initially, there is 4 small pots that have been installed for a long time, and they would have been used along with our 2 rectifiers for wine distillates. So I adapted them to make double distillation single malt whiskey. So everything we've made to date is double distilled, and the classic Scotch style way that we do it.
Yeah.
We added a mash tun, fermenters, the mill, just the general. It's a 1.5 ton mash, quite small at the moment. So this year we've installed 2 frilly pots, an 8,000 and a 6,000 litre pot, and they are actually getting commissioned on fermented mash next week.
Okay.
And that will allow us to make around about 600,000-700,000 LA a year. And next year we'll probably place another order to double the capacity again.
Wow.
So add another 2 pots, along with a 3 ton mash tun.
Yeah.
And we're building warehouses, so there's a lot of cash injection into the project, and whiskey's not an overnight success. It's 10, 15, 20 years. And I'm sure
Right.
Dr. Salame's sons are thinking about it. he's doing all the hard work, and hopefully they'll get all the gain.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and you'll be the only game in town here for a little while, probably. So if somebody wants a Romanian whiskey, then you kind of have the market cornered unless somebody comes in and says, "Ooh, we're gonna put up a distillery and do it short aged."
Well, that's what usually when somebody starts something, somebody else wants to do it. So
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I think for the company, it was important to get the first. And we started 2017, so as soon as you start laying down stock, you've got the first anyway. So
Yeah. So is there a person, I mean, this is what's really fun about being the first is you kind of have a opportunity to create a style or a, kind of carve out what is Romanian whiskey going to be like. And so what do you feel like if you could put your stamp on Romanian whiskey, what would be that stamp?
people ask me what kind of style is it, and they'll go, "Is it a Highland or a Lowland?" And I'm like, "Well, that's actually Scotch."
Yeah.
It has its own style, because of the many finishes that we've done. We have 18, I think, finished whiskies at the moment. There's 34 different whiskies in total, 18 of which are finishes. It's because of the wine finish, it's quite sweet and easy to drink. But when you take away the finish cask and you actually have just the bourbon, matured whiskey, maybe 3-4 years old, it's a classic Scotch. I wouldn't call it a Highland, maybe a Speyside.
Yeah.
The peated is very like some of the peated whiskey actually made in Ireland. It was triple distilled though in Ireland, so it was a little lighter. But it has it's a slightly heavier kind of note to it. Our mouthfeel is very oily as well and easy to drink. And you have to check yourself that it's 46% alcohol because it's so easy. I've heard a lot of people say that to me. Especially the wine finishes, they'll go, "Oh, it's so easy to drink," and I have to remember it's 46%.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that after having a conversation with James at our draw and Silky, and that he's doing triple distilled peated whiskeys, that in a way it really does open up the door, I think, for people who want to get into smoky whiskeys but need a good entry to do so. My entry was always to get people on Connemara, because to me that was a nice, I call it Talisker light in a way, because it has some of that character to it, but it's not as smoky as going into a Lafroig or into a Ardbeg or something like that right from the start.
Well, in Ireland, I worked with David Hines, who probably created Connemara, when he was at Cooley. And I remember saying to John Teeling, "We should make some peated whiskies." There's no market for it. And then he told me just last year that we never made enough. So that was one.
Nice.
But from memory, I think that it was 52 ppm when we bought the barley in, and through triple distillation, it became. You still had the smoke, but it was very sweet at the GND, and it was a really nice whiskey once it was in the bourbon cask for a few years.
Yeah.
And I knew it would do well. But at the time, in 2015, I think I did it in 2016, there wasn't really anybody making peated whiskey in Ireland, just Cooley, Connemara. And I believe some of the brands that bought that whiskey probably kicked off the revival of peated whiskey in Ireland. So, people like or the brands Bill Phil, that was very successful, and that was the peated whiskey we did at G&D, and that just seemed to be an explosion of peat in Ireland then. So I quite like a peated whiskey with bitter lemon. You have peat, smoke, and bitter lemon. And it works quite well. If you want, you should try it. It's nice.
Very nice. Yeah, I'll have to do that, because I love peated whiskey. And I think as I was going through Ireland, it just makes sense the narrative had been written there for so long that everything was triple distilled. There was no peated whiskey. That's Scotch. You don't do that in Ireland.
That's right.
And to throw away that history, and because just like Scotland, they were peating especially on the west coast, away from where they could get the coal out to. So, I mean, it was just a natural, and it's fun to talk to people who say that when they smell Irish peated whiskey, they kind of remember their childhood and maybe going to a little cabin somewhere and smelling that smell and going, oh, I remember that
See,
smell.
a lot of these whiskies evolve because during the malting of barley, you have to dry it with something. So there would have been peat and coal, and that's how they did it, and that's how they got the smoke. And probably didn't realise they were making a peated whiskey, but that's what they did make,
Yeah.
But the Romanian whiskey, when I did that first, I was like, don't think Romania is quite ready for a big, heavy peat hitter yet. Yeah. So I just did 35 ppm. And it's probably around just about under 20, after distillation. So it's okay. It's the smoke is there, but you've still got the bourbon, vanilla, and sweet. So if you don't like peat, you'll like something in it.
So talk about the weather differences, because if you were distilling in Scotland, you're distilling in Ireland, you got pretty, the temperature swings, the humidity, all the rest is fairly consistent, I would say. But then you go to somewhere like Romania, you're on the edge of the mountains. Was this kind of a relearning and kind of taking into account the way things are aging there?
Well, that's one of the things you can't change unless you alter the atmosphere that the casks are maturing. You get what weather you get. So here it's long summers, long hot summers, very low humidity, short, cold, generally winters, but it's changing. I've noticed even like it's global warming, things are just not as cold as it used to be. But we actually, the first couple of thousand casks were matured underground in we call it the krama, so it's like a cellar. And the temperatures in the summer don't get too hot. It probably gets up to about 25, 26, and probably around about 10, less than 10, just under in the winter. So it's not that different from, Scotland, the swings. And the maturation losses are very similar to Scotland. There's no.
Okay.
I thought it would have been much worse, but it's not. It's actually okay.
So you're not looking necessarily. You could still age for a decade or longer without tasting like wood. Then.
No, we could. I mean, a 10-year-old would be, very similar. It's when you come above ground with warehouses above ground, especially with new materials, construction materials, you start to get really hot inside the building. Yeah. So, one of the warehouse projects we're doing is actually a brick-built warehouse at our winery we've converted. We've spent a lot of money trying to bring it up to standard and we'll probably get 7,000 casks in there. So it's nice and cool in the summer. It's ideal.
Is that kind of the goal, is to start really working in some of the old casks that you're using for wine into different finishes that you'll be doing?
Well, the winemaker, when she's finished with her casks for winemaking, I take them and I either use them for finishing or I use them for full maturation. So one of the whiskies we released was a Pinot Noir, and that spent 3.5 years in a Pinot Noir cask only, and it's very, very nice. So we don't have the same constraints as the Scotch whiskey regulations and things like that. So we can, lots of innovation and things.
Yeah, so there's no real rules set at all at this point. Would that be the case, or are there some generalized, like, European rules?
There's the European rules, There's which are not as wide kind of ranging as the Scotch Whisky Association or the Irish Whisky Association. Have just adopted most of the Scotch things, but in Scotland you either have malt whisky or grain whisky, and any innovation that you do is thrown generally under the grain whisky banner, and that's. But here you can, and Ireland, in fact, you can call it pot still or mixed mash bills and things. So,
yeah,
I think the Scotch are missing it in a lot of things.
Well, that's interesting because as I was traveling around Ireland, the thing I kept hearing was, we're gonna sooner or later pass by Scotland because Scotland can't really get outside of their box. And I thought, well, there is creativity going on in Scotland, but you're right, there are some barriers that will probably hold them back. And I mean, they couldn't actually make a pot still whiskey in Scotland unless
Well, you actually, I don't believe you can call it pot still whiskey. I might be wrong. Like in the true Irish sense of a mixed mash bill.
yeah. And would you have to send it through a column still to make it? I mean, that wouldn't be pot still definitely when you send it through a column still.
We tried that at Loch Lomond. We made 100% malted barley mashes and put it through columns. It made a very light malt whiskey, and the intention was to add it to the blends. So put it in some of the blends as a 5%, 95% 5 blend.
Yeah.
And, instantly the Scotch Whisky Association just came down in it like a ton of bricks. So that's a grain whiskey now. They call it a grain whiskey.
Okay.
It's probably called Spearhead.
It's interesting to see how all this goes because there was a seaweed whiskey Curragh, and I was talking to Stephen Randalls, who was over it at the time, and we were chatting about it. It's an Irish spirit. And they had also made a peated vodka, and they could sell it as peated vodka. But then when they tried to sell it in the United States, they couldn't call it peated vodka because they'd added something to it, which took it away from the vodka category. And it's like, does anybody know what grain whiskey really is, if that's what they're going to have to call it? It's not quite as a romantic a name. It's such a really great spirit. It's kind of sad to see that. It has to have. It's like regulations are great, but then in a way, they can get a little frustrating as well.
They can. They stifle innovation, but they also maintain tradition, quality. In Scotch, despite what other countries say, it's hard to beat. It really is. A good Scotch whiskey is very hard to beat.
So if you were going to see in America, if we want to, or in the United States, if we want to create a whiskey, we just have to run it through a barrel. It just doesn't even have to stay in the barrel. It just has to touch and say it was inside an oak container. Is that as loose as your regulations are?
No. We have to mature it for 3 years here.
3 years, okay.
Even with the European regs. I was thinking about back in Ireland again. I was going to attempt to make bourbon, so I ordered a container of virgin oak bourbon casks, and we were advised not to call it bourbon by, I think it was Bord Beer at the time. So we just made a grain whiskey and filled the virgin oak casks. So there was 210 virgin oak casks maturing away with grain whiskey, and suddenly I thought, well, we could use that actually for some of the blends rather than use caramel, because it's very dark and rich and spicy. And again, a lot of the blends in Ireland are using that and still using it, and that was the reason why, because it should have been a bourbon, but it's a whiskey.
Well, there's a distillery that I talked to not too long ago that is attempting in Ireland to make a sour mash whiskey. So this will be interesting to see how that pulls off. And you're right. I mean, the U.S. is as protective of the name bourbon as the Scots are of Scotch. So,
Scotch.
And totally makes sense from that standpoint. But it's funny, as I go back and I'm researching history, there was a whiskey that had been made in the U.S. and during Prohibition they made it in Canada. Somebody I know I'm going crazy on geography here. Somebody in New Orleans during Prohibition wrote about it in a newspaper, and they called it a Scotch. They said they called it a Canadian Scotch, and I thought, oof, boy. Don't let someone in Scotland see that. Of course, this was 1934, but still.
I know, there's a lot of lawyers in the Scotch Whisky Association looking for things like this all over the world. Now
Yeah, yeah,
we have we have quite a few Scotch brands in the pipeline. We have a blend at the moment called Red Bowler, and we have Highland Mountain, and another single malt called Highland Peak, which I thought was a bit close to a very well known brand. But again, we've done all the labels and we've sent them off to the Scotch Whisky Association, and there is quite tight rules with Scotch, so
yeah.
it's protected well.
But all of that is being produced in Scotland, so
So with blended whiskey and blended malt whiskey, you can bottle. So we'll bottle in Romania, but with the single malt, we'll bottle in Scotland.
okay. Yeah, because we had the issue here with the Virginia Distilling Company that they called one of their whiskeys a Highland whiskey, and they got slapped on that one. The Scotch Whisky Association never sleeps.
No. They're always, you have to comply, or they will come down on top of you.
Yeah,
and it's easier just to work with them, because they are very, very helpful.
Yeah, very nice, very nice. So let's get into these whiskeys. These are your first releases. You said these came out in November. So wow, this feels I feel privileged to be this early in the game on getting a chance to taste these. And let's jump into the one first. Fatasca Negra, is that correct?
Fatasca Negra. So Fatasca Negra is a Romanian wine grape, which the actual wine itself is very difficult to find outside Romania. It's it's very fruity, very easy to drink. And that's one of the reasons I picked it to do the finishes, because I thought, well, that's going to impart only good things. But actually, when you drink it, it's quite a punchy whiskey. It's quite it's heavier than I thought it would be, and that probably comes from the European oak. So that particular whiskey would have spent over 3 years in a select bourbon barrel and 1 year in a Fatasca Negra cask.
Okay. It's really it's interesting that I let it sit for some time, and I was not getting baking spices until I let it sit for a while. The first thing that I really was getting out of it is there's almost like this little minerally meaty note. It's hard to describe it, but it and maybe that maybe it's in the pepper that I'm getting out of it.
There's definitely spice. It was somebody else actually said that there is a slight pork chopped.
Yeah, it is.
It was reviewed by the Whiskey Mag guys, and one of the review by the editor was that there's a smoked barbecue kind of flavor to it. So
at first, when I went in and I nosed this, I thought, is this peated? I because of picking up that kind of meaty note. It's a note that I also get in Cayo Mizunara Oak whiskey, and it's just like this little sweet pork barbecue note that it'd be fascinating to know where that comes from, because the Madeira, which we'll try here in a moment, also has it, but it's really, really light. So it's like maybe it's coming from the distillate.
No, the distillate is actually, if it was there, it would be in all the whiskies. It would be in the bourbon or, in the plain distillate itself.
Yeah.
But it's not there. It's something it's something totally unexpected, actually, because the wine itself has none of that character. That's whiskey for you, though.
Yeah.
You just, sometimes you plan things and you get something totally different.
There's a lot of, the first time I tasted it, I said the grape really steals the show on this. The raisins, I was reading your tasting notes and I read pineapple and I went, yep, there's pineapple right there too. Yeah, absolutely. A little honey, vanilla, I guess, coming from the bourbon barrel as well. Really unique flavor. I mean, you say, could you put it as Highland or Speyside in terms of a character? It really is a unique whiskey to me. And like I say, the only thing that I can relate it to is that Cayo Mizunara Oak, which has kind of a sea character to it, and maybe that's a bit of like a salty character that I'm picking up in that as well.
And you're right when you say you're getting the vanilla notes and the sweetness and things like that. But I think that, you know, definitely spice of the European oak is coming through.
Yeah.
Some of the fruits from the actual wine itself. But it's a difficult one to put, you know.
Yeah.
If I put the bourbon and the whiskey, the wine and the bourbon whiskey, you'd be like, oh, where is that flavors coming from?
Yeah, it would be interesting to taste the wine and then taste what what comes out of the bourbon barrel to see where that flavor is coming from, because it's really interesting. And I guess sometimes too, I found this in my own little blending experiments, that sometimes you can put two things together and suddenly they create something else.
Something different.
Yeah, that you didn't get out of either one, but somehow the marriage of the two of them creates its own unique flavor.
And I think that is what's happened with that one. But that was one of the whiskies that, you know, Vitesca Negra. Everybody in Romania probably has drank Vitesca Negra wine. You know, it's widely available here, and I thought, you know, if you put that in the label, that's going to bridge the gap between whiskey and wine. And one of the plans we have to do is we're going to do is a gift pack with a bottle of Carpathian and a little bottle of Vitesca Negra in the gift pack.
Okay.
So that people can try both.
Ease people into it. Yeah.
Aye.
I just had I bought a bottle of Highland Park 12, which is one of the whiskeys I always keep around, and it came with a little bottle of 18, and I thought, just a little mini bottle inside the box, and I thought, that's really smart, because a lot of people aren't going to put the money to buy 18 on a whim, and here's an opportunity for them to get a experience of it while buying their regular go-to whiskey. So
it's probably good marketing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Entice people into an 18-year-old.
So Madeira is near and dear to my heart, because on my Whiskey Lore Stories podcast, I actually did an episode around whiskeys aged at sea, and really it started that off with the idea of Madeira being aged initially at sea, and from an American standpoint, it was, you know, our forefathers all drank Madeira because it was very easily accessible back then. So it's a really interesting one for me in terms of seeing this as one of the casks that you went after. How did you go about deciding on Madeira as a way to go in terms of a finishing cask?
Well, I started. We obviously were done finishings in Loch Lomond, but the GND, I knew we were going to supply a lot of various different customers who wanted different things. So I started laying down lots of different stock and started finishings. I knew Madeira worked from the past. So again, I think it's just through experience, and I like it. So if I like it, most people, you know, it's probably a selfish answer. I quite like a Madeira finished whiskey. You know, and if you're a whiskey drinker, what's not to like?
Yeah, exactly. Well, Madeira for me has been one of those. I saw an experiment that someone was doing with a Madeira cask, and he said you got to be careful, because if you leave it in there too long, your whiskey becomes Madeira.
You know, that is. I've seen that issue actually with some of the stock that I've got at the moment. Bottle supply is quite difficult to get still, you know, in the whiskey industry. And some of the whiskies, you know what, I'm going to have to blend in future blends because they've just been finishing too long.
Yeah.
I think Madeira's that one is okay. That was again 3.5 years, I think, in a bourbon cask, and then just over a year in a Madeira cask.
Okay, it's picked up a very interesting color too. It's really interesting. If I put these two side by side, if you ask me which one had the wine in it, I would say this one. But it does have kind of a interesting color, and you're not putting any colorants or anything.
No. So everything, all the releases we've done to date is single cask.
Okay.
Bottled at 46% and non-chill filtered.
Okay. Well, then that's an interesting point too. If you're doing single cask, it's very possible that I may be getting elevated amounts of a particular note in a whiskey that somebody else gets a bottle of it from another cask, and they'll have a slightly different experience maybe with it.
Well, when just what you said, I think I did 20 Fitesca Negra casks as single cask bottlings, and every one of them has a different colour, slightly different taste. If somebody goes into a shop and they'll see the different bottlings, it's a testament that it is single cask, and it's not just a blend of all the, maybe 200-300 casks and then bottled.
Mm. And do you mention that single cask on the?
There is it's single cask, non-chill filtered.
Okay. Well, I definitely. Oh, go ahead.
No, on you go.
Well, I definitely get the dark fruits on this one, much more so. And again, that little peppery note is there, but a little more on the oak I pull out of this one, and a nice sweetness to it that's not overpowering. So it's got a nice balance to it.
So, I mean, the whiskies are quite young. They're not even 5 years is probably the oldest that we have. So it's still, it's developing, I would say, nicely.
Yeah, well, it doesn't taste young, which is a good thing.
Good to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. So, so what are the plans for the brand? Are you planning on potentially trying to move into Western European markets? Is the U.S. ever on the horizon, or what's kind of the plan?
Well, so Alexandrian has quite a big distribution network. We have offices in Brazil, Cyprus, the States, soon to be in the UK, and China as well, and different distribution partners around the world. So the plan is to supply, everybody basically.
Okay, that's the reason you need so much capacity, right?
Well, there's big plans, so and we're going to still keep going with the rollout and advertising and marketing. We'll do all the Whiskey Live shows, the Whiskey Fest shows, and continue with different countries. I've got lots of Italian finishes coming. I've got lots of Spanish finishes coming. I've got Jerez,
nice.
Oloroso and PX casks. Oloroso casks from Jerez. So they'll just be single cask bottlings every year.
Very nice.
There's a lot of different whiskies to promote and sell and develop.
Fantastic. And so where are you available right now if somebody was looking for one of these first editions?
So we have an event tomorrow. I think there was about 1,000 bottles sent to Cyprus of Commandaria finished Carpathian, and that's an ancient wine from Cyprus. We've started selling online, and lots of distributors in Romania have started taking cases for the kind of the festive period. So hopefully it's in most of the major stores in Romania by the middle of December, we're hoping.
Okay, very good. Well, Allan, I appreciate you introducing us to what you're doing there and Romanian whiskey and the start of a new tradition, which is
let's hope.
which is fantastic. Yeah. Well, you're doing great so far. So I look forward to seeing what you guys do in the future, and I appreciate you being on the show and sharing these bottles with me.
It's been great, and thanks for your feedback. It's very encouraging. Thanks very much, Drew.
Thank you.
Cheers.